protocols, those specifics have to be worked out, but that provides the direction to the administrative team to provide those protocols and make those recommendations and utilize our experts groups to help us determine the difference between local control and the things that are that we must respond to. So the language within the resolution simply just says that it's not binding. It's simply saying that is what we are all going forward with so that we can continue to not waffle on that decision, that we can do the work that's necessary to implement that option. So it would be my recommendation that Appendix A is representative of Scenario 1, which is an in-person model available with an online model available to parents as choice at a 5-day-a-week full capacity based on the enrollment.
Kevin, you're muted.
Sorry.
Kevin, did you want to speak?
Yeah, just two things. One, I was going back through some of the feedback we had, and there were a couple of questions out there about homeschooling and support from the district in terms of syllabus and or curriculum and workbooks and things like that. I don't know how we work that kind of thing, but it seems to be a sensible support to those parents that want to do some homeschooling with support from the district. That's just one comment. We don't have to go into a lot of detail about it right now.
Can I address that before you go on to the next one?
Yeah, sure.
Homeschooling is a very defined, specific requirement by the state. If you choose to homeschool, there are requirements around homeschool. You do that on your own. If you're going to participate in remote, that would be with our support. That blended crossover, it will be homeschooling is something separate than remote learning. And if you are going to homeschool, you need to follow the procedures of homeschool.
Okay, you can explain more about the legalities of that to me offline, which would be fine. The other comment was going to be, I don't know if did I hear you say the PowerPoint presentation is going to be kind of attached to the motion, and if so, I'm about communications on this one. I think we have a little over 400 people watching tonight, but the community that we're addressing is far larger than that, and there's a couple of important messages that have come out here during this discussion about focus on staff well-being being a major priority as we work out the details of this. My request is that we find some way to reflect that either in the PowerPoint, in the motion, or certainly in all of the subsequent communications that will occur. I think people need to know that that we have a multi perspective strategy unfolding here.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, are we finished that portion of the reopening plans and ready to move to the reading of the face covering mask policy?
I
Just a
am, if the
reminder
board
to
is.
people too that just because it's been a while, we're at 8:45 here. You said it early on that you will be having those question and answer sessions once a lot of these details are worked out, because everything's changing day to day and there's still so many unknowns.
Thank you, Eileen.
Okay, Amy, did you want me to introduce the reading of the face covering? The policy is there in board docs, and there are a couple of changes because my proofreading asked for a couple of changes to be made there in language, but basically it is the one that was first presented on the agenda. And so hopefully everyone has read it. And I think, Amy, we would be ready to have questions on that policy. It would not be adopted this evening. This is the first reading. It would be adopted on August 11th. So there's opportunity for discussion and consideration of that policy.
Yes, and I do know that several board members have contacted me about questions or clarifications or suggestions. I indicated, please bring those suggestions forward to the group tonight, and if the board in totality wishes to have those adjustments made in the first reading, we can make those. I will run, this particular draft has gone through legal. So any adjustments that we would make to that, I would take through legal so that that was clear at the adoption, so that we would make sure that our policy did not violate some legal requirements. So we're free to have that discussion, and I will try to capture people's thoughts. Then the procedure for that would be from my notes. I would ask my assistant to put those notes into the format that you see with corrections, and then I would provide that back out to you to make sure that I had captured your thoughts accurately before bringing that to legal and before that would come back to an adoption on August 11th, just as a clarification of how we would proceed.
And I see Kevin's hand, and I'll just remind the board that normally the way policies would work is that the policy committee would have worked through a lot of this, but because this is coming at the point that it is, the policy committee doesn't have recommendations. We're sort of making it all together. So go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, super quick. I sent this to Amy earlier. The comment shall not include surgical masks or respirators. My suggestion on that is that we modify it along the lines of shall not include medical grade masks or N95 respirators, which are really the issue. And Eric, I'm sure, can comment on.
Yeah, and it's funny, Kevin, because I actually had the same conversation with Amy earlier, and I'm a little bit torn because, you know, on one hand, that clearly has been an issue, and we still don't have the number of N95 respirators that I would like at the hospital. On the other hand, I would like to encourage people to purchase and use as good of a quality mask as possible within their ability. And I think that it's probably good to take that language out. I would say that face coverings and masks, and I don't have a great idea, but hospitals at this point have a much better handle on the supply chain than we did 4 months ago. So we're not fighting residents for supplies anymore, as we were back in March when, you know, and unfortunately this is a different conversation, you know, the guidance was given that you didn't need a face mask. Well, that was partially because there weren't face masks and hospitals didn't have them. And so what we didn't want to have happen is hospital staff fighting the communities for supplies, because once the hospital workers get sick, things fall apart very quickly. So at any rate, that was a long way around the fact that I'm not sure that we necessarily need to have that language. I would actually encourage people to have as good of a quality face mask for their child as possible.
Any other
thoughts of the board around that, of a recommendation to altering the policy in that way?
I guess I would ask, as it goes through legal, when we take it out, if there was some state legal guidance that put that in there because of the guidelines. I think it may be outdated and it may be within, I mean, I believe at least the governor's guidelines have said that face masks are required for staff and that they should be recommended for students, and that we have a little more leeway with students under the age of 10 or under third grade. But I feel as long as it's legally all right to take that out, that there is no legal requirement that we reserve surgical masks and respirators for healthcare workers. I'm fine with taking it out and maybe adding language that we recommend, whatever Eric's language would be, as good of a mask as you can get. That's probably not policy language, but some language that says use the appropriate and as effective as possible masks that you can use.
And just to go back, wearing N95 masks for kids for 7 hours in a row isn't going to work. It gives me a headache, you know. So it's just not feasible that they would ever wear those in an effective fashion. So.
Are we going to have things in place for when a kid loses a mask or forgets a mask or sneezes in their mask or, you know, the million other things, chews on their mask, puts M&Ms inside their mask? Are we going to have things in place to deal with that?
That's a guideline and the implementation of a policy. We're at what is the policy level right now, and
Okay.
then that's up. Then that's incumbent on us to how would we implement that policy.
Okay, I guess what made me think of it is in the last paragraph of the policy, is that referring to disciplinary action if they don't adhere to it, or if the mask doesn't adhere to, say, like dress code or something because it has profanity on it?
Well, right now, if we would require that all students and staff follow board policy. You are required to follow board policy. Currently, that paragraph where we just eliminated the not include surgical masks says masks designed to be worn for costume purposes, etc. Would not be required, would be a problem. All face covering masks shall meet the requirements of the appropriate dress code policies and/or codes of conduct. That would be policy language, and the expectation would be that all staff and students adhere to board policy.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Amy, how difficult will it be for us? I know it's not normal that the board approves guidelines or procedures. Do you think by the time we approve this policy, there will be a good sense of what the guidelines will be, or how the buildings are going to incorporate this into their code of conduct so that the board would be able to see it?
Absolutely. So if we're talking about approving this on August 11, that would clearly solidly fall into the how are we going to do business when it comes time to open schools. So having a clear understanding of how we're going to implement this policy by August 11 would be defined.
Okay. Anything else? All right, the policy doesn't require a vote this evening, but what we are agreeing to, I believe, as a board, is that this policy move forward and be prepared for adoption on August 11th. So we are making a statement that we're going to have a face mask policy. And I know that's a question that has come up in emails and in community conversation. Are we going to require? And so, you know, I think the community can understand that the policy is going to require face masks. So,
to go on from that, the policy that will be brought forward on August 11th will accommodate the grammatical or syntax suggestions that are reflected in red in the policy that's attached to board docs currently. And we will make the change to eliminate shall not include surgical mask and respirators that we just discussed. And I will run that through legal to make sure that we can do that without putting the district, the board at risk for some reason because through the elimination of that language. And I will have that prepared for the August 11th board meeting.
Okay, anything else? Then we would move on to the actual resolution. The 3.1, approve a resolution adopting the 2020-2021 academic plans and options program for the reopening of the Loveland City School District. And as noted previously, Exhibit A referenced in there does not exist yet, but will reference the 5-day-a-week plus online option. Are there questions about that resolution, or are you ready to make a motion for that resolution? Kevin?
You're on mute, Kevin.
Muted. You're muted, Kevin.
Sorry. So I raised this one earlier. I just want to get it out in the public domain here. I don't know if it becomes part of our, I guess this video is in essence the minutes of the meeting in addition to the actual minutes. But there's some wording here under section 1 that the superintendent is authorized to take any and all actions necessary to implement the proposal. And the concern that I have is that could be read as an open ability of the superintendent to spend without additional board approval. I just wanted to be clear that we're not authorizing additional spending at this time. That there needs to be some discussion if there's any significant expenses out there in the future. So that's my only concern on the resolution.
And I'll let Amy speak to that, but my understanding of authorization that the superintendent has from the board is authorization to perform her duties as the superintendent of the district, and that includes taking some actions as emergency kinds of actions. So this would read to mean that we're going to have 5-day-a-week school, but if the schools have to close, she has the authorization to do that. She would have the authorization to make this plan work within the parameters of the budget that the Board of Education has approved. It does not give her carte blanche, as you would say. It allows her to perform her job within the parameters that have been set. Is that correct to say it that way?
I would also add that given the desire of the board members to ensure that our staff is protected through our regular systems of communication, which would be weekly emails on Friday, and within the budget as established with Mr. Hawley, if there are additional expenditures related to protective gear, we would bring the board along on that, understanding that at the same time we have CARES money and money that's provided through the government to address these additional expenses. So to clarify, yes, it does not provide the superintendent carte blanche to spend money, but there will be expenses related to this that we want to be able to utilize so that we're ready to open school. But none of those would be significant. There's still rules in place that if we were to expend at a certain threshold, the board would have to approve that. If we were talking about changing the filtration system at all of our buildings to change all of the air conditioning units, that's something that I unilaterally could not be due regardless of this resolution. That would meet a threshold that would have to require board approval and bids and that sort of thing. So it is really simply just an endorsement of please go forward with that, and understanding that there has to be business that's done to prepare for school.
Yeah, and I just wanted to talk to that briefly as well.
Sorry, I was going to ask you a question, Kevin. Maybe you're answering it already. Didn't the state just add additional CARES Act money that's going to be allocated to the different districts?
What a great segue,
Yeah,
Mrs.
that's
Washburn.
that's great. So this was appropriate time to bring that up as well. So the district has previously received CARES Act money. If you recall, you approved the creation of a fund. I believe it was at the last meeting, and that's what's called ESSR funds or ESSER funds. We received roughly about $350,000, but we also do funnel some of those money to our non-public districts. So we roughly received about $320,000. Just today, we received information that we are going to be receiving further funds from the state of Ohio. And this one, I would say for Loveland in particular, not necessarily Loveland in particular, but when they try to make things equitable, unfortunately what happens in districts like Loveland is we typically receive less than other districts do. And in this particular case, they did not use the same factors. So the state of Ohio received $100 million and dispersed it amongst public districts, but also towards private schools. And we are receiving roughly $235,000. That does have to be spent by the end of December. The ESSER money has to be spent by the end of 2022, which I'm sure we're going to more than find ways to be able to utilize it. But the other one has to be done by the end of December. But it's nice to get that news literally a few hours ago. I've already spoken to the Ohio Department of Education to understand even further of how that can be utilized within the district. And so, even as we're talking about PPE and some of those concerns, it'll be extremely helpful to be able to utilize that. So if you do the math, obviously it's roughly about $550,000 of extra revenue that's coming to the district to take care of things like this. I asked them as well, do you anticipate further opportunities like this? And they said definitely. As one of my colleagues says, hope is not a strategy. So we believe it will be coming. We will not necessarily lean on that, but I do believe that there was possibilities of further funds coming to the district for similar needs. So all that to be said, we are still anticipating, and this will come up in our next conversation, we're still anticipating similar cuts from the state for our state funding. The state has actually come out and basically said that at this point in time, but this does help. So that's a great point and great question. I think Amy kind of addressed it. I just want to make sure as well, I know Mr. Ames is working very diligently to make sure that we're taking care of all the needs within the district. And so if there are some increased expenses when it comes to PPE or something similar, I just want to make sure that he feels that he has the ability to be able to take care of some of those needs. I fully believe that trying to take care of this by August 11th or trying to discuss it at a board meeting would be too late to be able to accomplish that. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that, John.
Many items that we are working on daily, trying to acquire, we're trying to source it from wherever it's coming from. And it's one of those things, if you don't buy it when you find it, you may not have it tomorrow. We are working with the Hamilton County ESC, who is doing consortium purchasing. So if somebody does call and say, hey, we've got 400,000 masks available, how many do you need? How many can you afford? That is one of the things that I would need to jump on right away, just to make sure that we do have all of the stuff that we need prior to that opening. I don't see it as being large amounts of money, but that's those items that are very hard to come by right now.
I mean, I think when safety is our number one priority here, that I can imagine anybody in the community or on the board getting upset about purchasing things that contribute to the overall safety of our students and staff.
Anything else? I don't think we then had a motion to adopt this resolution yet.
So
Um,
moved.
I hear Dr. Swetchenow and I see Mrs. Washburn. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? We discussed it a lot. Okay, Mr. Hawley, can we vote on that then?
Ms. Pettit? I think you're on mute, Michelle.
Michelle, you're on mute.
You can just do this.
Yes? There you go.
There you go. It just wouldn't unmute.
So Ms. Pettit,
Yes.
So did you vote,
Okay.
Michelle?
thank you. Yeah. Dr. Swetchenow,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes. Motion carried. Unless there's any other discussion about the opening of school, which has taken us approximately 3 hours, we will move on to what this special meeting was originally called for, which was to discuss finances. If I could just introduce briefly, in previous meetings, we set this special meeting, and we did discuss whether or not there would be public hearing. We did not end up with a public hearing for the meeting. As I look back at the meetings we had discussion of would there be hearing of the public, wouldn't there be hearing of the public? And we had discussions about setting up a committee and not setting up a committee. And so what we did in the end was charge the finance committee with doing research and seeking communication. So there was not a separate ad hoc finance committee set up. It was the finance committee that did this work. As far as hearing of the public, I mentioned earlier, we did receive some 40 emails concerning the financial issues we'd be speaking about tonight. I did make a resume of what was in those emails, and I would be happy if the board would entertain the notion, if you would like those put into the minutes. Those could be entered into the minutes if you want, but we can discuss that as we talk about the finance meeting. I just wanted to speak to the issue of hearing of the public and what committee worked on this work. And then I believe I will turn the floor over either to Mr. Hawley, our treasurer, or to Mr. Doherty or Dr. Swetchenow, our finance committee. I'll let you gentlemen fight it out and tell me who's going to start this discussion.
I vote Kevin Hawley. All kidding aside, thank you, Kathy, for that lead in. I appreciate it. Kevin Doherty is going to do the vast majority of the talking. I'm going to kind of lead us off. Kevin, do you have the ability to share your screen in this meeting? Wonderful. Before we kind of get going on the slide, and Kevin's going to roll it out for me, I have to say that I realize now, after all the work that we've done in the past 6 weeks, why the additional board members had charged us with this job rather than taking it on themselves. So I appreciate that. But all kidding aside, you know, and I've said this before, the fact that 2 board members stepped down and opened up a spot for 2 new board members to come in with the realization that we had 2 failed school levies, really was a very giving and open thing for them to do. And the fact that the 3 current board members selected Kevin and I with the charge of, okay, we'll dive right into this and find out why the community is upset and where we went wrong with the previous levy strategy we had, and how do we go right to come up with another levy strategy, was an additional very giving and humble thing to do. So I appreciate being charged with that work, especially as a brand new board member. And which is a good lead in for me to say, like, as I went into this process, I really thought of it as a listening tour. How do I get to hear the voices of the community? How do I get to understand where we are and where we came from? And I really thought of it really as a historian. You know, what is the history of the Loveland schools in the Loveland School District? What is the recent history? How do we move from a position in which there has been tremendous dissatisfaction and quite frankly, words going back and forth between people that aren't what I like to see in the community. And I thought of this as kind of in my schooling background as the ancient Greek historian Herodotus. He's the father of history, and he used Greek words which I won't bore you with, but they essentially said, look at this problem with curiosity. Listen to the people who are telling you the stories, and then critically reflect on the data that you are given in order to understand what the pathway forwards is and what the story of your history is. So going back to the voice of the community, and Kevin really coined this term, which I think has been very helpful. How do we as a board hear from our community? And this is what, in a very short period of time, which really was brought on by the statutory requirements of the state of Ohio to determine if a levy in November was even possible, we needed to have that conversation by today. So we went out and had numerous conversations across the community. We did this via Zoom meetings. We did this via phone. It wasn't just Kevin Doherty and I doing these meetings. All of the board members did these, and the feedback of all of the board members has been important in this conversation. But the reality is, in a short period of time, we probably reached somewhere between 500 and 800 people total, which is really great. But our community is 50,000 people, and the number of people who voted in the last levy was around 10,000 people. So we still only heard a very small portion of our community. But nonetheless, there were key messages that were heard. And the messages really were this: our district needs to focus on 3 pillars. We need to focus on regaining trust. We need to focus on transparency. How does the school district make decisions, and why did they make those decisions? And we need to focus on fiscal discipline. How can we be as disciplined as possible with the feeling that our costs have gotten away from us? And the message that we heard from the community members that we were able to reach was, don't proceed with a November levy. This would be a mistake right now. You haven't had the chance to focus enough on trust, transparency, and discipline in order to convince us to change our minds. And we're not going to be able to support a levy in November. And so really what that means is we need to continue to gather the voice of the community. How do we ensure that we're hearing from as much of the community as possible to understand what we need to do to fix the problems that we've had? And this really leads into what Kevin Hawley and Kevin Doherty and I have been working on the most, which is financial analysis of where we are as a district. We've started that process. We're nowhere close to finishing it. We've identified where some of the problems are. And I think that the biggest identification has been that our expenditures have been increasing at a rate higher than our household income in the community has been increasing. And we can see this as a community when we say, gosh, why is the budget of the schools going up? Why are my taxes going up when my income hasn't been able to follow that? And that's been a problem in the recent past. And it's a problem that was of our own making and was purposeful. It had goals. It wasn't done just for the heck of it. It wasn't done because nobody had anything else better to do than spend money. But nonetheless, the expenditures increased at a rate higher than our household incomes in the community increased. And then when you break it down, the biggest cost in our school district by far is our personnel costs, which is both a good and bad problem to have. What it means is that we're spending most of our money as a school district on our personnel. Our staff, our teachers, our workers in the schools that's where we're spending the vast majority of our money. There's not a lot of fluff in this budget by any stretch of the imagination. Don't get me wrong, we've identified areas in which there's concerns, but personnel costs really have to be the focus on why our budget has grown and how do we fix our budget, our structural budget problems. And so that kind of was my intro. Kevin's going to go into more detail, I'm sure that he feels the same way that I do, which is the faster I talk, the sooner this meeting gets over.
Okay, so we put together a list of what we're going to call discussion points. We really mean that. Hopefully we don't, given especially the hour, need to go into an enormous amount of detail on any particular point that I'm going to get into here. I'm going to try to run through this relatively quickly and then put it out there for the board to have some discussion about. Ultimately, what we would like to see happen coming out of this is an acknowledgement that all of these discussion points, or some of them, are indeed important to the board, should be focused on, and specific actions undertaken going forward to address them. Eric talked about the work that we've done from a financial analysis perspective. There has been a significant amount done. Despite that, I will tell you that there is a lot more to do, and each one, basically, of the points that I'm going to put up on the screen here will require a fair amount of additional analytical work. But we've done enough to sort of drill into the picture and get a pretty good understanding of where the issues are, where the opportunities, or at least the focus areas, need to be. So let me just start with what we think of as short-term cash conservation strategies. And this is simply acknowledging the fact that we don't have a secured long-term funding, incremental funding source available to us. And we, in fact, are spending at a rate that is in excess of the revenue growth and the revenue itself that we have. And eventually we're going to have to do something about it. And we need to focus as much as we can immediately on strategies that will conserve cash and give us the flexibility to deal with a relatively uncertain future. So there's a couple of things in this section. And it's actually quite limited. It's areas that we have some degree of discretionary control over. So we talk about, for example, an employee headcount freeze until we've had time to really research student-teacher ratios, and we'll talk a little bit about that from a going forward perspective in a moment. But headcount freezes are not the same as hiring freezes. We're not trying, for example, to handicap Amy's ability to run the district if she has turnover that she feels that she needs to respond to, as long as the overall headcount stays solid until we're able to see more clearly a longer-term picture. Second on this list is the idea of strict budget adherence. We actually ended up talking a little bit about that in the earlier reopening discussion, and the direction to avoid what we would call all discretionary spending. Now, I know Kevin educates me in the sense that discretionary might have specific meanings to different folks, but what we're trying to say here is if there's a choice about spending a dollar, if there's a choice about it, don't spend the dollar. Bank it, hang on to it until we're further down the road. We need to conserve as much as we possibly can. Then we go into a series, and there's about a dozen or so of these, of more specific financial strategies and tactics that are both designed to deliver improved fiscal discipline, but at the same time, build on the community feedback and establish further trust and clear transparency about our financial matters. So first on this list, and Kevin and I have talked about this, and I think we've talked about it in a previous board meeting as well. Back in January, the board committed to a series of savings initiatives, and our goal here would just be to put together a specific list of those items and any others that evolve as we go into the future here, document them, track them, report on them on a regular basis. That's good management process, and it's good transparency. Next on the list is sorry, two of these come up at the same time. Develop and regularly share an easy to understand district financial health report. Kevin's required to produce a number of different schedules for the state and the district. Not all of that is so easy to understand. And we're recommending here that we develop something more akin to kind of a traditional P&L and balance sheet kind of view of the district, less detail, but far easier to understand, and make it available on a regular ongoing basis along with the savings plan and progress report. Next up on the list is the one I referred to up in A1, which is to evaluate the ratio of students to teachers by what we call grade band here. And Eileen has helped educate me a little bit on this one, that in fact, our labor agreement calls for some focus on size of classes, as well as the state having some requirements about overall ratios across the schools. So we've got some limits, but that's not necessarily limiting our ability to drive into this at a more micro level and review our staffing to our student ratio for what we call optimization and appropriateness to both the district and the community vision and our overall financial health. Next on the list is evaluate administration headcount growth and the resulting organizational model for optimization and appropriateness, again, to district and community financials. This is not just something that we pulled out of the air. The data tells us that we have had administration headcount growth, and the data that we've generally looked at here is between 2013 and 2020. I'll hasten to add that while we've had headcount growth in administration, the contribution of administration salaries and benefits to overall expenses is not as significant as a whole lot of other things that are here in front of us. But there has been growth, and it warrants some review and to make sure that we've done the right things there, that we're comfortable with the resulting organizational model, and we challenge ourselves to say it's really, in fact, what we want. Similarly, we've looked at the salary and benefit structures across all classifications of employees, and we believe that some focus on administrative salary and benefit structures for the same purposes is due. I'd suggest here that there might be more focus on the benefit structure than the salary structure. Little known, little understood is that administrative salary growth year over year is actually quite modest. It's generally in the 0.9% range, whereas benefit structure might be an area that is worthy of some more detailed review. As I said earlier on point number 4, administration is an area that we should be looking at, but we should have our expectations with respect to the materiality of the financial impact of doing some of these things is perhaps a lot more limited. We also say here, and this is obviously the major portion of our salary and benefits costs. It relates to the bargaining unit contracts, and it's time and it's necessary for us to take a look at the structure of those contracts for competitiveness across the state and surrounding areas, as well as the appropriateness to the overall health of the community. That's a topic that's needs to be gotten into irrespective of this, because we should be getting ready for negotiations on that in the coming months. Anyway, I would think. Reevaluate all departmental budgets for critical alignment with the district mission and direct student impact. That's a way of expanding on A number 2 to make sure that we take a fresh look at every building and every budget, and make sure that the monies that are in there are directly focused on student impact, and anything that's in fact optional comes under scrutiny and reevaluation. We carry a fairly significant cash balance. This has been talked a little bit about before. Kevin, you can correct me. I think we're in the $11 million range at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, so I can just, because of the savings that we saw with the recent building closure, and then also with some revenue increases that we were not expecting, we're a little bit over 12 million now.
Right. Okay. So it's a balance that's in excess of our operating needs, and the question arises. We've talked about $9.5 million as a threshold previously. Are there ways that we can lower that threshold, which gives us more life potentially to the cash balance? A little bit of a complicated area, but one that warrants some examination. Similarly, investment opportunities for cash in excess of current needs. Turns out that we're pretty limited from a legal perspective in how we can invest excess cash, but it's worth taking a look to see if there are revenue producing options available to us that can generate some additional income, but still abide by our legal requirements and have the requisite level of safety and security associated with them. Number 10, number 10 is re-examine procurement policies and practices and institute district appropriate revisions. We have a lot of discussion about the way we manage procurement. We do, in fact, have policies and practices that are not widely published and visible to the community, that controls the process that we go through. What we're saying here, though, is that it's a good opportunity to step back and examine what policies and procedures we actually have in place, and make sure that we're doing this in a way that balances the opportunity to reduce the cost of procured goods and services, frankly, with the cost of managing it. You can get into a very detailed bidding process on everything that we buy, for example, but doing that has its own overhead costs. And we want to make sure that whatever process that we do is optimized for the value and the level of procurement that's going on. But it's a fair game area. This number 11 has come up with a lot of community feedback, and it's evaluate alternative funding options to the traditional property tax, which everyone knows has represented the vast majority of our tax revenue. Things like a local income tax, other types of levies. Clearly, there are pros and cons with going down this path. From a pro perspective, I think most would agree that it's a more progressive tax policy and maybe a more appropriate policy for a financially diverse community as is Loveland. May push, for example, more of the tax burden to those families that have higher income levels, et cetera. It's a reason for looking at it. It's also an area that might be fraught with new controversy. So we're not recommending a specific future tax strategy here, but we are recommending that as part of our deliberations in the coming months, we look at alternatives to the traditional property tax for things that might make more sense in future rounds. One of the things that I think has come up, and this is really through the sessions that Eric referred to in the earlier slides, we've come into contact with a lot of people in the community that have skill, have capability, and we're going to suggest that may be available on a volunteer basis to lend a hand on some of the issues that are here in front of us. So versus going out and hiring another individual or hiring a consulting firm or some other thing, try as much as we can to reach out into the community for volunteers who are skilled and gifted that can lend a hand and work in a sense like the board does on a volunteer basis to try to figure out in more detail some of the solutions and some of the strategies that we need to come up with. And then finally, and I kind of referred to this leading into this slide, but achieve board alignment, create a sense of prioritization over these various items, task the development and implementation of fully developed strategies and tactics between now and early 2021, which if we did go for a levy or a tax sometime next year would probably be about the right time to have implemented a series of these changes and demonstrate to the public that we're doing things that are very consistent with what the public has asked us to focus on. And that really leads me to the recommendation that we're going to put in front of the board, which is do not proceed with a November 2020 levy and focus on these kinds of items in A and B that both help us manage our short-term needs, manage our long-term needs, put systems and practices in place that will help have a sustainable, long-term, fiscally sound platform for the district to be able to rely on. And that would allow us, again, consistent with the VOC work, to reevaluate any decisions prior to future levy windows, whenever they might be. We do believe that based on our current cash balance and projected reduced expenditures, that a short-term delay of any levy proposal is manageable. The caveat on that is C3 here. It's really the earlier discussion that COVID-19 financial impact issues will have to be closely monitored. I don't think, and Kevin, you can comment on this, I don't think we've heard anything in the earlier conversation in terms of at least specific numbers that would change these recommendations if the district had some significantly expensive issue arise during the course of the next 6 months. We might find ourselves in a far more difficult situation, and we'd have to develop new strategies to contend with it. But essentially, that's it. So let me open it up for open discussion here.
Can I go first on this one, since I went last on the open discussion before?
Sure.
Kathy, can I say something really fast?
Sure.
Just a comment that Kevin just made about just significant impacts or anything like that. I did want to just state something that you may have heard earlier. I just wanted to restate it. When we look at this year from what we had anticipated, what it would look like, where our cash balance is higher by about $740,000 than what we had anticipated. That is abnormal for us. We typically see right around where we had anticipated or expected it. This time frame with buildings being closed and COVID-19 for all districts really creates a situation where you're trying to determine what those costs might be. And so fortunately, we had some extra revenue that wasn't purely on the expense side. We had some increased revenue, which we actually did discuss at our last meeting, and some lower expenses than what we had anticipated. So even like what you were saying, Kevin, just to kind of reiterate whether or not it's manageable going forward. I mean, as we see the future right now, we do believe it is, especially with the $500,000 that we received from the state in addition, and our forecasted numbers right now are basically in line with what we had. We are forecasting the way that we had anticipated our state reductions were going to be. If there's any major changes, we might have to reevaluate, but at this present time, it would have to be something very, very significant to put us in a position where short-term cash needs for delaying a levy would not be manageable. So I just wanted to address that real fast. So sorry, Kathy.
That's okay. Thanks, Kevin. I just wanted to say a couple of general things, and then of course everybody else should feel free to add their notions about this. First of all, I will note that we lost about 200 audience members. So we know that we had a lot of people who were interested in the opening of school, but on the other hand, 200 audience members at this point is a very substantial amount as well. So we know that this was an important part of our discussion. I would say that any questions that I would have asked, I think the Finance Committee has sort of answered them. And my first question would have been that I fully understand the not proceeding with a November 2020 levy based on voice of the community work. It's what I would have expected. It's what certainly I was thinking of as a taxpayer myself in Loveland, that you know, a third levy was not, that there was levy fatigue, and among other things. So I think you've answered the questions on that. To continue with Eric's Greek references, I think you gentlemen must have come from the Greek city-state of Sparta, because a lot of this is very Spartan. But I don't think that anything that is outlined here has to do with anything that the district has not tried to look at in the past. I think there are some interesting and sort of valuable new strategies and new tactics, things that I think could help the district. And this is my general take on what you said. And that is that just as you call them short-term cash conservation strategies, I would feel that this might be a short-term piece of work for the entire board, that perhaps the Finance Committee might consider creating a resolution very similar to the resolution that the board passed either the end of last year or the beginning of this year concerning the rate of growth in the budget, that there might be a resolution so that our treasurer and our superintendent have sort of a clear understanding that the board is behind a particular resolution, that it's not a Finance Committee move, that we treat hiring in a certain way, or that we treat the budget in a certain way, that there's a full board buy-in on that. And then on the list of B strategies, I would sort of expect giving the Finance Committee more work and asking them to sort of prioritize those and help the board get to work on those. Not saying they have to work on them on their own, but to say that here are the ones that are prioritized for the next 2 months, and here are the ones that are prioritized. So that's my general take on the whole thing. I think it's a very good idea not to proceed with a November 2020 levy. And then all of the other things I think are very valuable things for the board to consider.
Can I just say one last thing as well? This is not necessarily for the board, because I know the board does know this, because we did have conversations back in June, and it's not intended to sway decision or anything like that. I fully believe like that my job is to just give data and just help people understand, and also since we have 200 people still watching, just so that the general public just understands some just basic thoughts on school funding. Just understand on like a property tax, the way that property taxes are receipted into the district is if a levy does pass, it starts in January the following year. So in this particular case, as the board is stating, skipping November, whether it's in May or November of next year, if a levy does is proposed at those times, the revenue would not begin until January of, I always have to look at my calendar, 22. So just that the general public does have this understanding when you do look at millage numbers, I know oftentimes it can just look like a number. Delaying a vote does have impact on potentially what that number could be, because it is delaying any taxation for another full year. So it's more for the general public's understanding that, let's say, if you do look at the levy scenarios back in June that we looked at, you'll see very clearly if you delay it, how it has a millage impact. And so as we work through A and B and look at great strategies on financial fiscal accountability and stewardship within the district, just so that people understand that there's always only so much that we can do, and how delaying a levy does basically impact that number, if you will. And so it's,
So
again,
part of
not go ahead.
Part of the delicateness of this is that it really says that we're signing up for a revenue picture that doesn't change for over a year. And therefore, I'd go back to administration reinforcing A up here, that because we have a very uncertain future, we have to be very careful about every single dollar that we spend as we go forward. So it's just part of the challenge of the funding model that schools in Ohio, public schools in Ohio, have to live with.
Do I see Eileen ready to talk?
Oh, sure. I
She's
always like an
unmuted.
opportunity to speak. I don't have too much to say because I was discussing some of this, as Kevin mentioned. We discussed some of the student-teacher ratio information and some of the other bullets in there. I would like to thank you guys for all the work that you put in here. Kevin, Holly, Kevin, Doherty, and Eric, and I'm not sure who else was involved, but I know that you guys did a lot of work just to come up with these discussion points, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. And I certainly, like Dr. Lorenz said, as a community member taxpayer, at this point in time, don't think it is the right time to put a levy up. We don't have a lot of support out there for that at this time. And also, I think it's a huge burden to put on the community with everything else that's currently going on and all the unknowns. So thank you, guys.
I have a question for Amy. Is there, or currently, I think there was in the past, a compensation committee that had been working on some things as far as salaries go?
Sorry, I was unmuting. The answer to that is yes. That was primarily Mrs. Wiley and Mr. Jarvis. So yes, it exists. That's something that Chuck's going to need to pick up and work through that. The blip on the screen there would be the people who were doing that work. That's been handed over. It's there for Chuck as he starts to move forward. But, short answer, yes. Clarification around that is just through a transition of a board member and the administrator, it's going to take a minute to re-pick up the reins on that. But yeah, that does exist, and they have done a lot of work with our organizations.
So if I can, let me add a couple of numbers to the conversation here. We talk about people being a significant part of it. Currently, it's about 76.9%. Our people costs are about 76.9% of all of our expenditures. Our non-people costs are about 23%. The people costs over the 2013 to 2020 time period have grown at an annual compounded rate of 3.2%. Our non-people costs, surprisingly, have grown at 0.8%. Our expenses overall during that period have grown at about 2.6% annually. And our revenue, and this is from all sources, this analysis that Kevin has put together is a different view of our financial picture than we typically talk about. We're always talking about the general fund. What we did here was to look at all dollars, regardless of source and regardless of kind of category of expenditure. Our revenue over that same period grew at 2.1%. So that's all sources of revenue, 2.1 versus dollars going out at about 2.6%. And if you look at household income, we don't have great data on this, but it's from the U.S. Census data. Looks like household income has grown at about 1%. So effectively, what we have is a collision between spending trends, revenue trends, and the people that are actually providing the revenue to us. And that's why we have put on the list here a whole bunch of things that may appear to be difficult to make headway with, et cetera. But I think that the overall financial trends don't leave us a choice but to attack all of these and to see what is actually possible to make progress on.
Well, and I need to chime in on that just from a personal standpoint, is that I know that I personally have had no salary increase in the past 3 years. And I know that taxes have gone up in the past 3 years. And I know that inflation has gone up in the past 3 years. So that all has eaten into my, spendable income. And what we heard community members say over and over again is my tax burden has increased disproportionately to my salary burden. And I'm feeling this more deeply than I have in the past. And it's something that we as a school district need to take into account. It's wonderful for us to say, hey, we're going to hold this to the rate of inflation. By the way, we haven't held it to the rate of inflation in a long time, so we're ahead of that now, and that's a problem. But we'll just hold it to the rate of inflation from now on. I think that honestly, we're going to need to cut a little deeper than holding it to the rate of inflation in order to make it palatable to our community. And this is a perfect opportunity to put more Greek into it for Kathy. The Athenians beat the Spartans because they were democratic. They had buy-in from their population versus being ruled by their kings. I'm not at all suggesting that you guys were the Spartans and that the community is the Athenians, but we need to get the buy-in of everybody in order to make progress. And that was just an example because I like Greek.
At least you don't speak in Greek, so we're okay.
Anybody else want to add a comment? Amy, would you like to add anything to the discussion?
I would like to say that this is something that Kevin and I have been, not this particular list, but this is something that Kevin and I have been working on since we became a team, is how do we implement systems to monitor our expenditures and to implement opportunities to influence our expenditures at times where you can influence that expense rather than waiting till summer and saying, oh gosh, this is when we should change things, but things are already in motion. How do we embed our procedures for monitoring and curbing expenses into our school improvement plan? So I know that both Kevin and I welcome the systems for accountability to help lead our teams forward to do that in a way that doesn't negatively impact teaching and learning and student outcomes. So, we are looking forward to developing a plan that supports the district and continues to offer the education that we provide kids.
So Kathy, I don't, just to try to keep things moving, given the hour, I think I've heard you suggest that the finance committee work on a resolution for rate of growth. I think I've heard you said, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe the finance committee could prioritize these various items. I don't know if you would like us to try to make some recommendations about who should tackle these, or if the board and together should try to decide that. But I don't know that necessarily the finance committee is the perfect answer for every one of these items, but maybe a lot of them.
I think that you got the gist of what I said, but I don't want to be the person who says, this is what we do. It was just my suggestion.
Right.
It does look like A1 and 2 could be a part of either an addition to or a change to the resolution that we made about growth and spending. And then that the financial strategies under B could be things that some of them looked to me like they could be a finance committee task to say what a savings plan and progress report might look like and bring that to the board to say, just for a board agreement that, yes, that's the report we want. That perhaps some of the other evaluations, the finance committee might say, here's how it is, but there might be other board members who want to be a part of a 2-member team that does that, as opposed to just giving them all to the finance committee. But if the finance committee could sort of prioritize and say, which ones need to be done first, which ones have the finance committee already started some work on, and bring those to the board at the next meeting or the next couple of meetings and get some of them underway, so that we begin to see some action on these rather than just, yes, these are the ideas that the board is interested in. And then some things from the pandemic come up and we move along with that, or, those kinds of things, that we actually get to work on some of these.
Looking at this, I've always been one that's divide and conquer. Let's divide it out and conquer. So I see several of these strategies that we could maybe filter over into some of the other committees, such as the student experience, evaluating the head counts and teacher and the ratios, and there might be some things in there that the policy committee could tackle in addition to the finance committees. And that way, if we divide it all out, and then we equally share the burden, and we already have these existing committees. Just a thought.
I think that sounds great, and I'm very cognizant of trying not to do work out of the public eye, but perhaps we could kick this over to, and again, I need buy-in from you guys, Kevin and Amy. Perhaps we can kick this to Kevin and Amy and say, look at A and B and look at our board structure and tell us how we can help you to figure these things out. We want to divvy this to student experience. We want to divvy this to finance committee. And then you tell us how to proceed best in order to help to progress towards these goals. Does that sound feasible or even desirable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can very easily do that. I mean, kind of what you're saying, Eric, as well, is even just with our intimate knowledge of just the structures of the school district. So, you know, when you look at certain ones, you're like, this would be the right person or group to task with that. It's not necessarily something that I'm only going to do or Amy's only going to do. We have a lot of really great people in the district, you know, outside the community, but also within the district that can tackle some of these things. So yeah, I think it's something we can just sit down, look at it, and kind of evaluate where is maybe the most appropriate place to start. We can bring that back to you.
So I'd like to suggest that we do something that we recommended someplace else, or maybe we're going to recommend it under communications, but there's a list of a dozen or so items here. I'd like to suggest, because all of us are here right now, that the Finance Committee takes responsibility for kind of scoreboarding these strategies and reporting back on a regular basis. You know, what's being done on each of them. If it gets assigned to another committee, that might be the status that's reported. But in any event, keeping track of these things and, you know, at every meeting, talking about, setting aside some time to talk about how are we doing on these things, what's the progress, et cetera.
I would say that in general, we have had in the past at each of our regular business meetings, time for committee reports. And so I think it would make perfect sense for that to, as I sort of felt, the Finance Committee could sort of strategize on these, and if they get divvied up into other committees, that's fine, but that to have the Finance Committee reporting in their report of where things are, and then the other committees can report on where they've gotten in each of those items that are theirs. The only one would be number 13, which is something that's going to happen after all of these other things get worked on for a while. So,
yeah. Kathy, just to again keep an eye on the clock a little bit here. Maybe I'll just ask if any of the other board members or Amy or Kevin have additional comments, and if not, I think I'm looking at Eric and Kevin, we could close this agenda topic.
It sounds great to me. I turned into a pumpkin in 3 minutes.
well, I was going to sort of segue as well by speaking about a lot of the communication that we got before we leave this Finance Committee. A lot of the communication we got in the emails we got in the past couple of weeks concerned a levy, and I would just like some guidance from the rest of the board as to whether they would want that list that I compiled from those emails of the community input that we got. Would you like that list entered into the minutes so that it is available for the general public to see? Or do you want to have a discussion about that before we move on to communication?
I mean, I guess my opinion on that matter would be to incorporate it into the minutes, because the more that we can put out there for people, I think the better.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine by me. And I would also say that as a board member, I appreciate seeing all of those emails with people's opinions, and the ones that are more valuable and helpful are the ones that actually suggest these are where I see problems are, and these are things that you might want to focus on, versus the ones that say you're doing a bad job and don't raise taxes. You give me something actionable that I can help with, not just opinion.
The one comment I'll make about that is the list that I created was sort of a list of general concerns, and then a list of things that were suggested that the board should do. You will see in that list that some of those are oppositional ideas. We should cut teachers, or we should add teachers. We should open school, we should not open school. There were a variety of things like that. And so I listed them that way. And then there's finally a list of things that perhaps we shouldn't do, or things that we have been doing in a way that has not been agreeable to the community. So I will simply create that list. I would ask Kevin and Eric, would this PowerPoint that you showed was not available on board docs. Can that be attached to the minutes as a link as well, so that PowerPoint is out there for folks to see, because it was presented as a part of the meeting?
Yeah, by all means, we were working on it up until right before the meeting. So by all means, I'll make sure that Kevin has copies of anything that we put out there tonight.
All right. Then if it's agreeable with the board, I know Eric said he was turning into a pumpkin, but is the board willing? I think we're right about 10 o'clock. Is the board willing to consider another half hour for the meeting, or is the board?
I was teasing. I can be here all night.
Oh, no, don't say that. I like the pumpkin idea better than the all night idea. Okay, then I would suggest that this is an appropriate segue into the communications discussion. And I would suggest that perhaps we would not maybe even settle as much as we did with the finance one, but that we present a few ideas and have as much discussion as we can fit in a short amount of time. I'll preface it by saying that both Kevin Doherty and I said, hey, I have some ideas of how we might structure a discussion about communication. And so we tried to merge those thoughts together. We both agreed that what the board has been doing, and we're speaking here in terms of communication by the board to the community, or what the board hears from the community. We're not speaking about district communications. We're not talking about quality profiles. We're not talking about what the district does to make known what happens in the district. We're talking about what the community does. And we feel that from the feedback that we've been getting, that we're not doing it as well as we could be. And we've said for many, many times that we want to come up with something that helps our communication. I would suggest at the very beginning that the minimum that we need to come out of with this evening is a decision on our August 11th meeting, whether it will still be a Zoom meeting or not, whether we will still have hearing of the public via email, or whether we will try something else, and a decision on the continuation of posting videos, and an agreement to talk about minutes at some point in the future, since we're probably not going to get to that this evening. But the minimum is we have to make sure that we know what the August 11th meeting is going to be like as far as community input is concerned. So Kevin and I think we'll do this quick PowerPoint together, and then we can move on again to full board discussion. We started with what we do today.
Can I interrupt a second, Kathy?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sorry. And full transparency, I zoned out a little for a second because I was turning into a pumpkin, I guess, Eric. Did you say that we're putting off discussing Zoom meetings and the continuation of them and such?
No, I said that at the very minimum this evening, we need to come up with an absolute clarification of what the August 11th meeting will be like. Is it going to continue in this current format, and how will hearing of the public happen in August, on August 11th?
I apologize. I will.
That's okay.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm going to interrupt as well. We agreed to put on the previous PowerPoint as attached to the minutes. Can we? Is it okay with everybody? And we can talk about this at the end. Can we put this attached to the minutes as well? Because I don't think that this was in the agenda.
The PowerPoint was not in the agenda. The communications discussion was, but I'm fine with putting it on in the minutes when we're done as well. So what we started with is what we do today, and we currently have hearing in the public at meetings. We have newsletters from the district. We do have the district quality profile. There is some discussion from the board in the quality profile, but then we came up with, okay, that's what we do. It's not working. Here are some things that we could do right away. And some of them are things that have already happened. Kevin, I'll let you go through these if you want to.
Sure. Again, I'm going to try to do everything really quick given the time of night, but the interest group roundtables that Eric referred to earlier, I think have been incredibly useful. We can build on that, go further with that. I think we should definitely continue with those things. One of the last points that Eric made was about kind of the depth of voice of community that we've been able to achieve so far. The Zoom meetings, the one-on-one conversations, et cetera, are extremely valuable. But in order to get a rock solid handle on where the community is, we need to go much further. And we've talked about things like what I call a district pulse survey on a regular monthly basis. We can talk maybe separately about how to operationalize that. But that's the kind of tool that if we essentially ask the same questions repetitively every month or so down the road, maybe longer time periods, we can talk about that. It gives us the ability to track our progress in connecting with the community. We've talked about a separate website for the board to really focus on board-oriented communications, interaction with the community, and overall accountability that we have for the performance of the district. Another suggestion here is after every one of our board meetings, quick survey out to determine community reaction and input to further develop our own sense of performance and responsiveness. And we kind of hit on this one a little bit at the last, in some of the last topics, but a follow-through list. Again, good management practice. What did we decide to do during this meeting? We add it to the follow-up list, and that's part of every meeting. We put it out there and we say, we agreed to do this, we have done it or we haven't done it. If we've done it and come off the list, if we have yet to do it, it stays on the list as a reminder to decisions that were previously made. It's a good management process. It's good for accountability. And I think it helps build trust with the public that we really do follow through on the things that we say we're going to do.
Okay, I think if we go to the next level, some of the things that we need to talk about as we talk about doing all those things is the fact that we are 5 members individually, and that there are many things that we have to do together and speak as one. There have to be resolutions to do them. They can't just be one board member saying we're going to do this. So we have to have that recognition that members are independent and have a definition or a clear understanding of how members speak for the board. Not saying that people can't speak for the board, but need to be clear. Just as Dr. Swetchnow and I both sent something into Loveland Magazine concerning the pandemic and thoughts about wearing masks and things like that. I think we both made clear we were speaking as individuals, not for the board, because that request came to us from Loveland Magazine, not to the board, so we couldn't speak as a full board. So we have to remember those board member roles. And then we have to think a little bit, I think the next piece, Kevin, is the meeting structures and the fact that we have a regular board meeting, a business meeting that has certain amounts of business that need to be conducted and has not, at least in the past, lent itself to community interaction. Certainly there's time for hearing the public, but there has not been that much opportunity for give and take. And we need to think about how we are making sure that conversation is available to the public and how we can have that interaction outside of a business meeting that is a simply business meeting conducted in public, but it is not a public meeting. So those are the kinds of things that we can talk about. Emails within the board meeting, the availability of video meetings online, and future meeting structures that we can talk about how the meetings are working, and how we might want to change the structure. Did I catch all of those, Kevin?
You did, and there's just a couple more on this page. One would be Planning Commission connection with the community. One of the things that we can do in this respect is to both listen very carefully, and I know the Planning Commission is working very hard to listen to community members that may not feel that they're represented on the commission, but time will prove, I think, how effective all of that is, and we can include that in some of the survey work that we're doing here to make sure that the commission, as an extension of the board, we have some visibility as to how it's progressing with the community as well. Similarly to some other points we made earlier tonight, from a communications perspective, we can reach out, I hope, into the community. It's a good-sized community. It's the kinds of organizations, healthcare organizations, commercial organizations, big companies that are in the area, have a lot of skilled employees and retirees. And hopefully we can reach out and make a connection with some that will help us from an expert perspective, again, in a volunteer model, develop and deliver some of the things that we're talking about here.
Okay, Kevin, I'm going to ask you to lead us through page 3. And the reason I'm going to ask you to do that is that, part of the conversation that the 3 old board members, even though Eileen is probably the youngest of the 3 of us, the part of the conversation that the 3 of us had with all of those who indicated an interest in being appointed to the board was a lot of discussion about how the current board is seen and what we hoped that new members would help us do. And so it feels more comfortable for me to have you, Kevin, and maybe Eric to kind of weigh in on what is seen as what has happened with the board in the past and how maybe we can move forward that. I think it would give it a more valid sense than it might seem like lip service coming from me saying, oh, we have to do this. So
yeah, by all means, and I'd be happy to do it. I'm obviously prepared to do it, but I would say to the community that's listening, Kathy in particular has seen everything that's on these slides. Some of this is hard to look at. Some of it is hard to hear. But I think the board has really embraced hearing the feedback and embraced, kind of a commitment to make progress on these sometimes extraordinarily difficult issues. And I would continue to ask the community to, work with us. None of us are perfect. I believe all of us are trying to do the right thing here. Work with us cooperatively. Be part of the solution, as many of you have been, and help us think about the right way and the best way to do some of these things. So let me just jump into some of the feedback that we've had here. Clearly, there's an issue of trust between the board and its community. It's been damaged, and negative perceptions exist in several areas. A lot of this is reflected in the email traffic that the board has been getting over the last several days that Kathy will be attaching to the minutes. So we all see this. We all understand that this is what's happening. Clearly, based on the early levy initiatives, there's a perception that the board just didn't connect well with all segments of the community. It connected with some, but clearly not all. It's not sufficiently transparent, and its communication with the community is inadequate. It doesn't demonstrate fiscal responsibility. Clearly, there have been a number of occasions where the board and administration, individuals' effectiveness are challenged. That's a really tough thing to be out in the public space. But we know it's there. We're putting it here, and we understand that it's the kind of thing that needs to be addressed over time. I think it's important to note that the community is divided clearly between those that support the district, and I'm kind of talking about that in the sense of the people that are running the district, the board and administration. There are clearly folks that support the district, its performance, its people, and there are clearly those that are very critical of all the above. What I don't understand yet, and I think we really need to focus on this, and this goes back to some of the survey, some of the voice of the community in a much deeper way, is the unknown opinions of probably thousands of others in the community. If we're going to do this legitimately, if we're going to be voice of the community, sensitive and reactive, we have to have a very clear sense of the voice of the community. We've heard different parts of the community. We need to hear a lot more. So aside from being intrinsically unhealthy, this just is not a good situation, and we all understand it. The current situation has to be remedied before the district proposes any additional funding elements of what we call a comprehensive financial strategy, meaning that, clearly what we're trying to do here is not to be simply focused on revenue. We're also focused on expenditures and doing the right things in both areas. Alignment of the board, the district, and the community with respect to needs and abilities and the vision of the community has to be addressed immediately. And what we're commenting in part on there is that there is sometimes a divergence between the way the district looks at the goals of the Loveland schools, the way the board looks at it, and the way some parts of the community looks at it. We don't know objectively how aligned or misaligned we are. But this is one of those, before you spend a dollar, you better make sure that you're spending dollars on things that we all agree are right. Do we all have the same vision of what the Loveland schools should be? So we need to find that out. We need to develop specific goals, articulate them, make sure that there's alignment around it, create actions and measurements that are integrated as part of the culture that will be the board's culture going forward. Kathy, you okay if I go on to 4 or?
I am. I just want to emphasize that one of the things that Kevin and I did as we sort of combined ideas we had and thoughts to inform this discussion is we made sure that it's an understanding, again, that we are talking about board communication. We are not here talking about what the board believes the district should do, whatever the district is. We're not talking about telling people who work for us what to do. We're trying to talk about how we as a board communicate and how we as a board align those talking points with the district culture, so that we all work together. But we're really focusing on the board here, not other people. We're trying to address an issue that the board needs to work on. But yes, go ahead to number 4.
Okay, and then everybody else, if you just let us get through this, again, for expediency's sake, we can open up for broad conversation. So out here, I talk about this thing of a culture of transparency, that if we have that in place, it becomes the foundation of trust that ultimately enables the board to be effective. We kind of have a breakdown across this continuum that we need to get our arms wrapped around and make some progress with. It becomes evidenced through all modes of interaction. We've talked a little bit, or we'll talk some more about meeting design, the way we communicate orally and written. Do we have it in our DNA every day? That one of the things that we are all about, essentially part of the values of this board, and I hope the district as well, is that we are about transparency. It's it gets evidenced in the way, the ease with which we take accountability for things. And we've come out of a very difficult period of time here, roughly the last year or so, where the community has been so polarized. As somebody relatively new to the board and the district, one of the observations that I have is that people don't want to be wrong. They don't want to appear to be wrong about anything, because they're afraid that there's ramifications if they're not perfect. And that's an environment that's really tough to operate in. I'll tell you, from the business world, business guys are wrong every single day, and they're just used to being wrong and owning up to it for the most part. If you don't own up to it, it's more of a problem than almost anything, because the world's imperfect. It's very dynamic. Things change. You get to be wrong on day 2, even if you were right on day 1. But we need to be able to get to a level of trust between the board, the administration, the district, and the community, that it's okay to own up to things that didn't go exactly the way we said they were, or they are going really well, and we have confidence that the truth is being told. That becomes a far more effective environment than I think the one that we have today. All of us have to work on that one. One of the helps to this is being data-driven versus opinion-driven. I've said to a lot of people in one-on-one conversations, my opinion is the one that doesn't matter. The opinions that matter is essentially everybody else's. And the way we start to get to that is to be quantitatively oriented as much as we can. We don't have a lot of data often, but that doesn't mean that we can't start to build it. And people say, how much is enough? What's really representative? And I would suggest to you that any research data that we take in starts to be useful when we get something around a 5% response rate. When you get up into kind of the mid-10s, you really have some sense of confidence that the data that you're looking at really is telling you what the community thinks. It may be expensive to answer that data question sometimes, and it may be so expensive that the balance between it and the value that it brings to the conversation gets out of whack. That's okay, but getting ourselves to a place where we ask the question, we always ask the question, what data supports the position that's being articulated? What data supports the assumption that's out there in front of us? The more of that we get, the better off we'll be. And this last one is maybe become an area of controversy, but I think it needs to be out there. So one could say that the role of the board is to listen carefully to the community and act in direct response to what the community is saying. But I would suggest to you, and I think most of us would hopefully agree with this, that the board and the administration can and actually should have a vision that's somewhere ahead of the community, that brings the district to a new place. That's perfectly fine. It should be expected of us. We should have aspirations that outstrip where perhaps the community's mind is at a point in time. The thing that we have to be super careful about is that we can't go down that path without achieving alignment and support. That's the role of leadership. Once a vision, a new aspirational vision is created, can we be successful at creating alignment and support? Then we're all in this thing together. One of the ways that you make sure that that's there are things like feedback loops that, every step of the way, it's similar to what Amy was doing with the survey tonight. on scenarios. It's really simple, but before we really propose that we do A, B, or C, we have a sense that the community is strongly, weakly, or some other degree of alignment with us. And then finally, I kind of said this in an earlier slide, but what's the vision for the schools? And does the community agree with that vision? I hope they do. I know I've had feedback that's suggesting that, the term that you hear a lot is shiny new things or bells and whistles, right? And it's to be expected that some members of the community will disagree with what we're trying to do here. It's not okay, though, if a significant portion of the community has that opinion. If we're not in alignment, we need to address it. We either need to do a better job of convincing everybody that vision is right, or we have to deal with the fact that we can't convince them, and we have to change the vision and deal with the ramifications of that. But it does no good to let that kind of an issue simmer out there. So we need to find a way to address it. And I'll stop there, I think.
Thanks, Kevin. And I think it's a good place to stop. I think that, part of the reason that we're having this discussion is that, the board direction and vision and the district trajectory has come under question. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we are all on the same track and moving in a direction that is right for our students and understood by our community. So I would ask Eric and Michelle and Eileen if they've got questions or comments.
I do not. It was very thorough and well presented, well said. And I mean, as I said before with the finance, we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I feel like we can help bring the community back together and do what's best for everybody.
Michelle, any comments or questions?
No, I'm taking it all in and I'm processing it, and a lot of good information in here as far as how to move forward.
Well,
Eric?
I have 2 minutes until I turn into a pumpkin after our 30-minute extension. So the I think my only input is that I have heard in gathering feedback negative things about the administration and negative things about the other board members prior to the time that Kevin and I were appointed. And honestly, without trying to overstate it too much, I can't disagree more. And the reason for that is exactly what Kevin and Kathy have put in as the last point in this slide. What is the vision for the Loveland City School District schools? Does the community agree? The board took a vision and developed that vision, and they did it very successfully. And the administration took that vision and developed that vision and did it very successfully. And it's become clear that the community doesn't agree. That doesn't mean that the administration and the board did a bad job or are bad people or don't care about what the community thinks. The fact that 2 people steps down and 2 other people were appointed by this board, proves the opposite. So I just want to be very clear that I think very highly of the fact that the current administration and the previous board members are working hard to understand what the community supports and that we're going to do that. My job isn't even close to complete. We've put forth a series of suggestions and plans, and now we have to bring those to fruition. This is the trust, transparency, and fiscal responsibility. We start to regain trust by showing everybody that we're listening to them. We show transparency by saying these are the things that we're doing and why. and we show fiscal responsibility by making cuts in budgets that are hard to make. So, you know, I don't have anything to say other than thank you guys.
To bring this discussion to a close, can I ask the board to answer a couple of questions? And Kevin, it looks like maybe you had something more to add, but I want to ask if it's all right if I try to just get one thing accomplished on that list, and that is to bring to the next meeting a proposal for the to follow through list at the end of the meeting to make sure that we can work on that. And then also, can I get direction from my fellow board members? August 11th, are we continuing with a Zoom meeting? As I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, our administrative team was in the media center, is on this meeting from the media center, socially distanced, but participating in a room where they've been able to see each other a little bit easier than on a Zoom meeting. But we will still have, I would assume in August, the problems of we can't bring in the public probably in a very responsible way yet. So I guess I'm suggesting that we plan a Zoom meeting for August 11th. Administration can, I see Kevin with his thumbs up, administration could determine how well it worked for them in their current situation and determine if they would participate either in person or going back to the distance Zoom. But then I do think the board needs to determine an answer. Are we still going to ask for hearing of the public in that meeting in an email form, a pre-sent in email form, or are we going to try to allow for some other form of hearing of the public?
I would rather hear some other form of hearing from the public. An email just isn't personal to me.
And I'm wondering, and I'm just thinking out loud, if people who want to partake in hearing of the public, kind of a reservation system, and they can be in the audience, or I don't know if that would work.
You mean be physically in the audience?
Yeah. In August 11th, that's pretty close to when school's starting, when we're saying kids can be in the building. And I mean, if we're practicing social distancing in the classroom, it might be a trial run, if you will. Like I said, I'm thinking out loud. I don't know if.
Well, I know it's also possible to allow people to enter into Zoom meetings and then to put it indelicately, kick them back out again. But I'm not sure how well the tech support can deal with that. I do know that at the last meeting, when we asked for hearing of the public, we received only, there was a certain number, I believe there were 3 or 4 concerning busing, and then only 1 email that was outside of that subject. So I don't know if that's a result of people not wanting to participate that way, or if those were the only people who wanted to participate in hearing of the public in general.
So
Amy.
while a complete board decision, I will offer a conversation that we have started to have here at the administrative level is how many people could we have live and create, I'm using my hands as if you can see the the media center, but if we created a situation where people were 6 feet apart, could you hear, part of the problem pre-pandemic was people being able to hear us because of our sound system. Could we create a system or create a scenario where we could have 25 people be live or 50 people be live, just so that it wasn't so much about can we provide for distancing and safety. The media center is huge. It's about the balance between safety and then actually being able to hear. So that's something we've started to talk about here. So certainly we as a team could provide to the board, um, the ability to have people be here. So if, if you wanted to speak in the public, we could ensure that you would be in, and then the next blank people could have a seat. Otherwise, you would have to watch it, watch it online, question mark. But again, the board can make that decision, but that is information that we've been talking about here that we could provide to the board to expand your options.
My only thinking on that is if the board decides, if the 5 board members are planning on still a distance participation in the Zoom meeting for August 11th, then anybody who is presenting to the board, if they come in person and present on Zoom, they're not going to have the sense that they're presenting to the board because the board's going to be not there.
I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. That was assuming the board would also be here live.
Yeah. So it's just add to that discussion. Thoughts?
Yeah, the part I'm stuck on is if we're expecting our teachers to be in person and our kids to be in person, I think we should be in person at the very least, while we continue to still broadcast on something. I mean, they're all in the room on Zoom together. I imagine if we're closer than they are, that we're going to get a lot of feedback and such. So I acknowledge there are some technical issues and kinks, but I just think I don't know. What do others think?
Well, obviously, I'm brand new to the situation. I think that Eileen's point is a very good one, and I'm comfortable with saying, okay, well, as long as we can do this in a socially distanced fashion, let's try to do that. Going back to the recordings, this method is very easy to broadcast and record. How much do we lose by going back to a live scenario?
My sense was that we would go back to live, but that we would all still be on devices so that the meeting is still being streamed as if it were a Zoom meeting. We each have a computer, just as our administrative team does this evening. They each have a computer in front of them, so they're live in the room. Who knows what they're waving to each other that we can't. No, I'm just kidding. They are live in a room, but they each have a device, so they're also available on the Zoom meeting. So my sense was that we would, if we went back in person, we would still be producing a Zoom meeting that would be videotaped and streamed.
So that is an option, which is what we're testing out. The other option is we sit like we normally would have sit with our tables spread out a little further, and we just videotape that and live stream it. We give up a bit of clarity around sound, but I mean that is also an option. We're trying this one to see if that does improve the quality of people listening to us.
Yeah, I think I like that idea. And I've already said, I think that we should be in person if we're expecting others to be. And we've talked before about potentially meeting in the cafeteria because we can use the microphone there. And that way we don't know how many people would show up, but we could adhere to social distancing guidelines a little better in there. Again, just throwing some things out there, but I think it's important to get back in person.
So,
Okay, as far as your suggestion of using the microphone in the cafeteria, I'm not sure that, does that mean that every board member as they speak would have to go to the microphone? You know what I mean?
No, it means that we could utilize a sound system in there and allow people to hear. If you recall, we did have a very large attended board meeting and had it in there. That's not to say that people in the very back row couldn't hear. And it's not to say that we wouldn't have to limit in some capacity the number of people who could come in attendance live, but we certainly could be live and still stream the meeting.
Kevin.
So I think we build on something that's working. Highest number that I saw tonight was 430 attendees. And at almost 11 o'clock, we still have 100 here. I'm going to bet that's the largest attendance the board has probably ever had. So there's part of this that's really working well. And what I would like to see us do is for all the board members to be, physically distanced with a laptop in front of them, so we can have a virtual in-person meeting. I'd put maybe a podium out there with another laptop on it. So if members of the public wanted to come to the meeting in person, they can address the overall community, us and all the other virtual attendees online as well. I would allow email submission, because in person isn't going to work for everybody and being on video isn't going to work for everybody. It might be worthwhile to have a meeting that's scheduled for 2 hours versus a 30-minute segment of it, but 2 hours to allow interaction. I think, sometimes we get into a mode of just listening. And I think the community is wanting to hear from us. They're wanting to have a give and take. And I would love for us to have a meeting that is targeted at interaction. And it would look something like that. So I'm okay. Part of me says that an in-person meeting in August is not terrifically comfortable, because the world is still pretty unsettled in August. But Eileen's comment about what we're asking our staff to do swayed me. And I think
we lost you there, Kevin, for just a second. Can you repeat?
Yeah, sorry. I was saying that I think that there's a part of me that didn't want to do an in-person meeting in August because things are still so unsettled. But Eileen's comment a little while ago about us asking our staff to be out there changed my mind. And I think there's a way that we can physically set up a meeting that's safe for all participants, but still be in person. And I would also sign up for, that kind of an approach.
I would like to make just one comment about the allowing more time for interaction. And I would be reluctant to think about that for August 11th. And I would be reluctant to think about it for a regular business meeting, because I would want us to understand that the 5 board members may sign up for that, but I would be hesitant to require staff to sit through a 2-hour meeting if it was a board community interaction. And I have the same staff comment for August 11th. Are we prepared staff-wise to be able to have a meeting where we are in person and allow people to come in by reservation to speak for the half hour of public? I mean, that's going to require extra people. There's going to be somebody who needs to be at the door to let people in. There's going to be somebody who makes sure everything is sanitized. All the things that we're saying we have to do for school are going to have to be done if we have 10 or 12 guests come in and speak to us, besides the work of getting us all in the room. Do we have staff that we think we can do that?
Well, let me chime in, and Kathy, your points are really good. And obviously this is a little bit like our previous conversation of Sophie's choice. We would like to have as much input and transparency as possible, but to some degree we need to take baby steps. So perhaps for August 11th, we try to be in person and in one place to make sure that this system works. And we still do the same board meeting hearing of the public as we've done in the past, but via email like we did last month. And then we kind of build from that based on what things look like.
Thoughts?
I mean, I don't, no offense to any of you, but I don't love those ideas. I keep going back to, and maybe I'm just putting on my teacher hat and thinking of what I have to do in my role in just a few weeks coming up and how scary that is. And I'd be extra scared, I think, if my board said like, hey, we are hesitant to meet in person and we're hesitant to open it up to have people from the public come in, but send us your kids. I feel like by not allowing people to come in and by us not being there practicing what we're expecting others to do, I just think that's a really bad message.
Well,
I
I'm sorry to interject, but let me be clear, Eileen. I'm not, my concern isn't my exposure to the public. My concern is the logistics of it. And if we're going to change back to a different model, changing back slowly rather than changing back quickly for the board meeting, as opposed to the school, which is a completely different beast, may be more appropriate. But as you well know, I see 40 people a day. I'm not worried about being around people.
I thought that Eric was suggesting that the board does come back in person, but that we have the hearing of the public in the way we've done it before and see first how having all of us in a room works and what the requirements are, and then figure out how to bring the public into the meeting. It's possible that there will be some sort of requirement that we not meet in public on August 11th as well.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
I'm a pumpkin.
Uh-oh. We need some direction for August 11th, and we have a couple of resolutions we have to take.
So is there a common denominator here that we can agree on?
That that the board is going to be in person.
As a starting point, could we all agree on that?
And
Sounds good to me.
hearing of the public will be email. I suppose that people could send us video presentations if they want. We could show
them. That would be easy to do.
I'm not seeing lots of nods of heads.
Nobody disagrees with that plan.
Yeah.
I'm speaking for Eileen. Is that okay?
So
I don't love it, but I totally get your point, Eric, of it's not the health safety concern, it's the figuring out the logistics piece. I still
But us being
be in favor of the reservations or opening it up to X number of people, but obviously I'm one individual.
Well, let's interject to go back to Eileen's concern. Is there a logistics problem? Can we pull this off, Amy and Kevin? Can we get the public there? I can't imagine there's going to be a ton of people. Is there a way to do it?
I believe that we can provide an option for in public for people. It may be limited to 40. I mean, we may have to put a cap on it and figure out a way to communicate how many people can come in and who would have to watch it online potentially, but we can create a scenario where people can be in public.
I would disagree with you, Eric, that you can't imagine that there would be a lot of people who would want to be there. I mean, there were at one point 430 or 440 people listening to this. If anything changes as far as the virus is concerned, if there are any problems with getting school started, I could imagine that we could have a large audience that would like to be in public. I'd just be more comfortable having the administration and the board come back in person and have the remote hearing of the public for August 11th, and on August 11th, have a discussion of, okay, how do we open it up for in-person hearing of the public?
And I was just going to
Sounds good to
interject
me.
one thing as well, is just, and maybe Amy would have a better perspective on this, is just there are some potential legal things that we would just need to look into. And as if we can limit the amount of people that comes in, I'm sure we can. It's just, we just always want to be cognizant of open record or sunshine laws and things like that as well.
I guess
But we would
without
still be
talking to
streaming
legal,
it,
I would
right?
say it would be streaming, so it would be available to the public. Just being clear about some people can watch it in person and some people would have to watch it online. I certainly we can run that by legal, but we would not be restricting anybody's access to observe the work of the board. It just would be restricting whether you could watch it in person or whether you had to watch it online as you are now.
Absolutely. It's just like this nuance
Mhm.
because it's so brand new.
Who
Just,
gets in? I mean,
yeah,
that might be a
exactly.
discriminatory sort of thing to consider, but
Just,
we can certainly, I mean, we can certainly develop a plan.
sure.
Eileen, I know it's not your favorite, but can you live with the idea of we are in person to demonstrate that we are coming together and we understand the concerns of the teachers, the parents, and the children, yet logistically, we're not quite ready to have the public come in at rates that we're not sure that we can control just yet.
Yes, I mean, I can, yeah, I'd be fine with that.
Then Kathy, could you propose that we have a motion if we need one, or else that we decide on that?
I don't know that we need a motion. I just needed, I think, an agreement with the board so the administration can help us get ready for the August 11th meeting and that we can publicize it correctly, that we would still be having a meeting via Zoom. It's just going to be broadcast. All of us are going to be in person in one place, but we're still providing this live stream of a Zoom meeting. And that our hearing of the public is the procedure that we have on the website right now, that you need to submit items for hearing of the public by 4 o'clock on the day of the board meeting.
Great.
I'm losing my voice, so we probably have to end the meeting pretty soon.
Pumpkin.
Are we finished with communication discussion for the moment? I know we've communicated a lot.
I think, just Bill, quickly going off of that, because we said we would visit it this time and it can be really quick and we can discuss it further, but thinking about the videos and streaming and communication, I did go and watch the other board meetings with the closed captioning, and I know you don't love it, Kathy, but I thought that it was fine. For the most part, I liked Eric's name. It was like Sweat Now, or
Sometimes it was
I mean,
Chanel, so.
Yeah.
But that happens that happens to me every day.
Yeah, so see.
But
the
are
content part was fine.
They are available and we continue to post them. Is that correct? So they're out there.
The
Yes, that's
one
correct.
from last time, I couldn't turn the closed captioning on it, but the other ones I could. So I think that's just a setting on the end of whoever posts it from central office.
We have a little transition of who's monitoring the technology. As Mr. Lake takes that over, we'll make sure that he's clear about what that is. We're a little transition, and July is a little understaffed. So if there's something
Understandable.
missing, we can adjust that.
That's an easy fix.
Okay, this is going to be a quick item. We have on the agenda, consider dates for additional board meetings. It is my understanding that we had that on there in the event that we would consider a November levy. And so it is my belief that we don't need to consider any additional dates before August 11th. Am I correct on that? Treasurer, superintendent, other board members?
Unless the governor changes something on us again.
The superintendent does not, given the current situation, there is no superintendent that would have to happen before August 11th.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay, I guess there's a possibility there would be an emergency meeting, but there's no need to set any
Sure.
dates. So we
Agreed.
can move on to the treasurer resolutions, and there are two. Approval of the 6/23 Board of Education minutes and rescinding the resolution. I'm just going to ask Mr. Hawley to speak to rescinding that resolution, and then we can have a quick resolution for those two items, and we can get to the fun part of the meeting, which is the adjournment.
You know, to be honest with you, I'm kind of catching my second wind right now. So
Oh, I'm
I've
sorry to hear
I've
that.
never made it to midnight, and so I'm pretty excited about this.
Not going to happen tonight.
Okay, well,
No.
that's a bummer. Amy's giving me a look. Okay, so
I have a
obviously
bubble
the
in my
minutes-
mouth. Don't
yeah.
speak, bubble.
Yeah. It's midnight somewhere. So 5.2. The rescind language, what basically happened, if you recall, at the end of June, we cannot end the year with a negative balance in a fund. And so due to the building closure, we did lose revenue for our food service fund, significant revenue. And we had, at that point in time, approved a transfer of roughly $92,000 to the food service fund. And then subsequently, the state of Ohio sent us about $115,000. The state of Ohio, so this kind of goes back to, almost seems like maybe a conversation we had a week ago, but actually was earlier this evening, where this is what's happening with some frequency at times, is we are receiving funds that we don't necessarily know when we're going to receive them or if we're going to receive them. So this was actually a part of the CARES Act. The state of Ohio did receive a significant amount of money. We were told at one point in time that there was the potential that it would be sent specifically to our food service fund, but yet we're not told anything about it subsequently. And then it truthfully just showed up. And I talked to the Ohio Department of Education, and they just basically said they did a poor job of communicating it. So the nice thing is that we did not have to do the transfer. And so this is basically just rescinding the original transfer that we had on the books back at the end of June.
Okay.
Great.
I mean, I have about an hour's worth of questions I can answer.
Could I ask the board?
Kathy, do you have a motion?
Is there a motion to approve the treasurer resolution items 5.1 and 5.2? I see Mrs. Washburn and I see Ms. Pettit. So Mrs. Washburn moves and Ms. Pettit seconds. I'm sure there's no more discussion on that. If there is, certainly we will entertain it. All right, then, Mr. Hawley, can we vote on those?
Dr. Swetchenow,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes.
Ms. Pettit.
Yes.
Motion carried. At this point, unless there's any business that needs to come before the board from anyone except Mr. Hawley, we would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to leave.
Pettit moved. Is there a second? I'll second the motion to adjourn. I didn't see anybody else step up fast enough. So, Mr. Hawley, can we vote on adjourning?
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes.
Ms. Pettit,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchenow.
I object.
Just trying to make us get
Motion.
to 11.
Motion carried.
Motion carried. At this point, I would say the meeting is adjourned at 10:58 p.m. We made it before 11.
Shoo.
Thank you all very much. I
Yep.
appreciate your attention and your dedications tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for all of your
Thank
time.
Thank you,
guys did great.
and
I
thanks
appreciate it.
Chuck and John and Andrea, and welcome in your new
Good night.
roles.
Thank you all.
All right.
Good night,
Good night.
guys.